So the first thing we have to do is click Start and right click My Computer and Manage, because Server 2008 actually adds an extra step into promoting a domain controller. Server Manager is also an icon right down here by the Start menu. First thing we have to do is add a role. So add a role. This is a new step in Server 2008. So next, and we have to install Active Directory Domain Services. Not really sure what the purpose of this is. There's some warnings here. Should stop and read them while you do it. I'm not sure why they introduced this extra step in Server 2008, but they did. And we can still run DC Promo like you could in 2003 and install it, but it still goes through this step no matter what. So the purpose of a domain controller is so that I can have single sign-on. I can have machines joined to this domain, whether they be 2000 or XP or Vista, Windows 7, or even Linux. A lot of times we'll join to a Windows domain, and I have the same password no matter what machine I use. I can hook up an Exchange server to my domain and have the same password for my email. Hook up a Microsoft SQL server and have the same password to log in to manage the SQL server. This is the way that Microsoft has really come to the top of the game, is with single sign-on. It's why we are so serious about having proper passwords. It can come back and bite you, because if your password gets hacked, then they've got access to everything on the domain that you have access to, as opposed to having a password for this or a password for that and a password for this and a password for that. People tend to store those passwords on post-it notes, so you just look around their desk and suddenly find a whole bunch of post-it notes with cryptic things written on them, and now you know all their passwords. In the corporate world, it's generally your first initial, last name is your login. So the single sign-on, as long as you choose good passwords and keep them secure, is a wonderful thing. The way that I always try to choose passwords is by picking the most secure password that I can by using LeetSpeak quite a bit. For example, this is, let's say you go to YouTube every day. Well, a good way to pick a password is Y0U +U83. Still kind of says YouTube, but it's got letters and numbers and a symbol in there. So it's really hard to hack, and it's only 7 characters long. Yours should be much longer, but all you got to do is remember the word YouTube and you'll remember your password. So that's done. I'm going to close this notepad. Don't save. Alright, so now we have our Active Directory services installed. So now we need to start and run, and this is the same command that you ran in previous versions of Server. DC Promo, Domain Controller Promotion. So now we've got our Active Directory Domain Services Installation Wizard. There's a check mark for Advanced Mode, but I can't figure out the difference between Advanced Mode and regular install. So I'm just going to click Next. Next. This is going to be a DHCP or DNS, any kind of network functionality. I always like to turn off unnecessary network cards. So now our domain is the previous screen did have some important error messages that you should read about legacy systems. So it's important that you read it on your own. The video is a little too short for me to be reading it to you. We're going to create a new domain and a new forest. This is our first domain controller. So next. And one thing I always want to do is disable my network cards. So I'm going to go Network and Sharing Center, Manage Network Connections. Anytime that I mess with, actually going to be called my.domain. Next. And it's checking to see if anybody else has my.domain. An example of this would be your company's name. This is the database folder, yourcompany.com or yourcompany.net, whatever it may be. So we got to figure out our functional level. Our functional levels can be Server 2008. If we choose 2000, we don't get a lot of the features that they've introduced into 2008. Or if we choose 2003, we don't get a lot of the features they introduced with 2008. So next. And this requires DNS. That's why we had to put my.company to have DNS. You'll see that this will install DNS with it. The problem here is the fact that I have a static IP address assigned, but I do not have a static IPv6 address assigned. That is dynamic. But here in the States, we're not using IPv6 yet. We're only using IPv4.